listening to the Mark Bradford Alchemy for Life podcast.
Ready to put on the Mark glasses today? Well, hey there. Good morning. And boy, do I mean that today. I'll tell you at the end of this podcast why I'm saying it that way. Today I want to talk to you about layers. Specifically, what layers are between you and the thing that you do. The reality is that we don't just do a thing directly. No matter what it is that we do, there are layers between us and the result and clients and end product. Let me give you some examples. If you're a yoga teacher, you don't just teach yoga. There are layers between you and actually making an impact in teaching your students. Your desire is to have an impact on mind, body, and spirit to reach them in such a way as to impart wisdom physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. But to get to that point, you have to go through the layers. If you're going to have music of some kind during your sessions, you're going to have to figure out a way to get through that layer. Do you use technology? Do you have a portable setup? Is your studio equipped with built-in speakers and so forth? And speaking of the studio, do you rent one? That's a layer you have to go through to get to them. A gathering space. Something that coincidentally may have become a very difficult thing to acquire. Even within the gathering space, there are layers, such as climate control. How warm, how cool it is. If it's a great studio or room, but you have difficulty in getting it warm, your students will be uncomfortably cold. If it's terribly echoey and you have no way to project your voice, they may not hear you. Even reaching them so that they know when to gather typically requires technology, something. You have to somehow explain to them when to show up, and even the cost of it. How do you exchange monies for goods and services? That's another layer you have to go through. Even the distance to the studio can provide a layer challenge for you. You may have found the perfect studio, but it's way too far away from all of your students, or it's too far away from you. Let's have another example. Let's take writing books. I'll take myself as an example. I don't write books to write books. I didn't write my fiction so that you could hold in your hand a book. As fun and as tangible as it is to hold that in your hands, that's really not what I'm doing. I want to tell a story. When I heard voices and I saw scenes in my head, I would have liked to just touch my noodle to yours, and then imparted the entire story. But there are a lot of layers between you and I. There's the software to write. There's the environment. Then there's the end product. How will you consume this? Do you want to consume it with your eyes or your ears? Do you consume it on paper, thus a paperback, or on your electronic device? And within that, there's more layers. Which electronic device? I have to create and produce and market the proper file for you to see it on a Kindle, as opposed to on a Nook, as opposed to in a public library. If I put it on one platform, do I want to put it on there exclusively? Which then means I can't even deal with the other layers of distribution. Speaking of that, if I create an audiobook, there are multiple layers within that layer. Even though my audiobook was available on Apple Books, Google Play, and in libraries, even though the end user experience of listening to it was almost identical, most people said, Yeah, but is it on Audible? And by the way, it's on Audible now. Thank you. That's another layer. And I won't even mention the layers of language. My book right now is only available in English. So I have yet to pass the layer of the language barrier. So if you only can read Spanish or German or French, I'm sorry, you can't read my book. Does that make sense now? Are you starting to see the layers in your own job, in your own career, calling, or art? Is there something that you create that has multiple layers between you and your customer or consumer? Because there are. I mean, I can't think of a job in which you would just show up naked and there's no layers between you and... Oh, wait. But anyway, there are pretty much layers for all of us, you know, even from someone who's in the financial sector to a teacher, to an artist, to a performer, to a speaker. Even those on the other end of things. If you're a student, there are a number of layers between you and learning, right? If you're a student, the end result is for you to learn, experience, to grow, to absorb that new skill, and then ultimately try it out, right? Pursue your career using that skill, or use that skill as your career. You have to first get through the layer of, am I a visual learner? Am I an audio learner? Am I a conceptual learner? Once you figure that out, it's a little easier to figure out how to learn. But then you have to find the learning material. What if you're a visual learner and everything's written down? Well, you could read through pages upon pages of something and think, well, can someone just draw this out for me? Can you just draw me a graph or a drawing? And there may be none. So all of your notes are a lot of pictures because you had to interpret, so that you had to relearn it in a way that suits you. And then there's the testing. In a lot of teaching and learning circles, people are given tests to pass tests versus given tests to help them to have applied knowledge. That's another layer you have to go through. What about the college? What about the distance to the college? The kind of college you're going to? What about the classes? Is this an online class, in person? You have to go through the layer of the instructor. If the instructor is terrible at what they do, if they're a horrible teacher but they're great at what they do, that's not helpful either. That's a layer that's going to be a struggle for you. Okay, so now you're saying, well, Mark, okay, well, so what do I do with this, right? Now I see layers, and now I'm annoyed because I didn't want to see layers. But I see layers in my job. I see that my boss is a layer I have to go through to ultimately do things. My agent is a layer. The scheduling software I have to use to get people in a room is a layer. I see all that now, but so what? What do I do now? Well, as with my podcasts, I want to impart upon you information that you may never have encountered. And in this particular podcast, more so than most of the others, I want to impart upon you how Mark sees the world. I see all this stuff all the time. I see those things people don't see. So now that I'm giving you a little glimpse into seeing the world the way I see it, I want you to use that. You may not use it immediately, or something may pop into your brain right now and say, oh my God, that's the layers that are in my way. That's why that thing I did didn't work so well. That's why I'm struggling. Oh my God, there's like 10 layers between me and the thing I want to do. No wonder this is taking so long. I will stop beating myself up. See how that works? I will stop being frustrated because I have every right to be frustrated. And now that I feel I have every right to be frustrated, I'm no longer frustrated for some reason. Yeah, that's a thing. Or in business, you may think, oh, I didn't realize there were these layers here. This particular layer is what's preventing me from getting the word out. It's preventing me from being successful because of layer number 3 here. Or you may be able to adjust the way that you sell something, the way that you approach people, because you're using a method that introduces an extra layer that you don't really need. And you can literally avoid a layer by going a different direction. For me to impart these ideas upon you, I have to go through a number of layers. You're listening to this via some software. It could be the Apple iPod software. It could be on your Google device. It could be on your browser. It could be on YouTube if I've placed this on YouTube, etc., etc. But you've had to go through a couple layers just to get to my voice, which is my method of giving you ideas. And for me, those are layers that are a challenge as well. Because what if you have a friend who would absolutely love this podcast, but they don't do podcasts? They'd have a different way. They like watching standard TV. They didn't pull the cord yet, and they still have cable and so forth. Well, they'd have to see me on a cable channel, right? So that's another layer I'd have to go to and through just to get to your friends. So although I didn't do my standard pause within the podcast for you so that you could kind of pause and reflect, and you could have really at any time, as soon as I mentioned that everyone has layers, you could have paused and went, wait, let me think about this. I still want you to have some homework and think about this. Think about the layers between you and your end result, because you're going to have at least one. And I wouldn't doubt if there are something like 5 layers between you and the thing that you do. Without getting too lengthy, let me throw one more thing at you before I leave. This doesn't just apply to jobs. This applies to relationships as well. There are layers between you and your relationships. And you somehow figured out a way to get through them or work within them to make it work. Sometimes it's not you, and sometimes it's not them. It's the layer. So, I hope you found this useful. And now I want to tell you the thing I mentioned at the beginning. When I said good morning, and boy, do I mean good morning, it's because it's 3 a.m. If there's someone who has listened to my podcast called the 3 a.m. Wake Up Call, you'll probably smile now because I practice what I preach. And if you haven't listened to it, you should, because it's a podcast to help you get through the 3 a.m. wake up call that so many of us have. And this is one of my methods. I've seldom ever used this one, but it's great. It's fun. So I will talk to you later. I will see you again. And thank you so much for listening. As always, I very much welcome feedback, and take care of yourself. Hey, got some cool news for you. You know The Sword and the Sunflower's been out. It's only part 1 of an epic duet. The sequel and final conclusion is called Amira, and that is now released. The Sword and the Sunflower is also released on audiobook, which is available on many, many, many formats, including your local library. So check out an app called Hoopla. It's available for iPhone and Android and even Roku. Allows you to check out stuff from your library with just your library card, the way that you check out other things. So you can actually get the audiobook of The Sword and the Sunflower just by checking it out from the library. And check out Amira, which is now available on paperback and Kindle. And finally, in addition to that, the book called The Status Game 2 is actually available in libraries as well now as an audiobook. So check them all out and let me know what you think of The Sword and the Sunflower and Amira. I'm quite pleased and proud of those. Thank you.